You are watching
Ask the Instructor. Absorb the knowledge. Become the expert.
Hello and welcome to this week's episode of Ask the Instructor. My name is John Chrismo. This show is brought to you by the Tampa School of Real Estate and PassFirstTry.com. In today's real estate math, you should know we're going to be covering stamp taxes, also known as transfer taxes more generally, because this is going to just include the stamp tax on the deed, but also the stamp tax on the note. And the intangible tax, which isn't even technically a stamp tax. So we're going to break all three of those down because out of all the math on your exam, this is the one where there's probably the most to remember. But once you can remember these simple numbers and formulas, if you want to even call them that, number formulas. I don't like calling them number formulas. I like just calling it real estate, because it's far less intimidating when it's just real estate. And that's exactly what this is. So these are simple calculations that in the real world, the title company is going to be able to do. But on your exam, it's an easy point to get. Maybe even 2 points if it's two different questions. So let's head over to the board and go ahead and solve a question. Now, before we could solve one of these questions, we have to remember three different items, three different taxes, two different stamp taxes, make this a little darker here. This might be better. There we go. So there's three taxes to remember. Two different stamps. The first one's going to be the stamp tax on the deed. Then we have the stamp tax on the note, because it could be for multiple mortgages. And then finally, for the intangible tax, is only on new mortgages. So the stamp tax on the deed, the stamp tax on the note, and the intangible tax on new mortgages. Deed, note, intangible on new mortgages. There's three different formulas, three different calculations. However, they are very simple calculations. Let's start with the stamp tax on the deed. Now, the deed is based on the price. But we only need to purchase a stamp, which the stamps are 70 cents for the stamp tax on the deed. 70 cents per stamp. And we only need a stamp for every $100 of purchase price. Now, when you get to this point of the number of stamps, it's extremely important. It's crucial that you remember that you always round up to the next whole number of stamps, because these 70-cent stamps can only be purchased in whole increments. And you take that number and multiply it by 70 cents, and that's going to give you your stamp tax on the deed. It's a very easy calculation with just a couple nuances, and we're going to do an actual example of this in just a few minutes. But before we do that, let's talk about the stamp tax on the note. Now, the stamp tax on the note is almost identical, but with two key distinctions. Number one, it's based on the note versus the deed, and the note is going to be based on the loan amount, not the price. So that's a big distinction you want to make between the stamp on the deed, because the deed is tied to the price, whereas the note is tied to the loan amount. We're still going to divide by 100 because the stamps are still good for every $100. And again, we always have to round up for the number of stamps, because you cannot purchase a fraction of a stamp. You have to buy them in the whole increments, which leads me to the second difference, which is that they are 35 cents per stamp. So we've covered a lot so far. Let's recap. Number one, the stamp on the deed. Now, the stamp on the deed is based on the price. We take the price, divide it by 100 to figure out how many stamps we need, and we make sure that's a whole number, and if it's not, we round up to the next whole number. Always, whatever the decimal may be, you'd always round up for the number of stamps. You then multiply that by 70 cents to get your stamp tax on the deed. Now, your stamp tax on the note, very similar, but again, it's based on the loan amount divided by 100, again, to get the number of stamps, and then multiplied by 35 cents, because it's only 35 cents for the note stamps. And these are one-time taxes that are paid at closing. The final one-time tax paid at closing being the intangible tax, which is only on new loans. So if there's an assumed mortgage, you would not charge the intangible tax on an assumed loan. It would only be on any newly created mortgages. New loan, this one's the simplest. It's new loan times 0.002, which is 2 mils. And that's it. So yes, there are 3 different formulas, and this could be 3 different questions potentially, but most likely you're going to have this as one question on your exam. So let's recap one more time. We'll take a closer look at this here and review everything that is on the screen. We've got the stamp tax on the deed, which is the price, because the deed is associated with the price, divided by 100 gives you the number of stamps times 70 cents. The stamp tax on the note is based on the loan amount, so this could be a new loan or an assumed loan. We divide that by 100 to get the number of stamps, and then multiply that by 35 cents to get the total stamp tax on the note. And one tip I'll give you on this here, in case there are multiple loans, to calculate these separately, because you may have to round up twice. And if you have to round up twice, that's the difference of an extra stamp, which can make a big difference between a right and wrong answer. So calculate these separately to avoid that problem. And finally, the intangible tax, the simplest of them all, and it's only on new loans, and we just multiply that by 2 mils, which is 0.002, as a decimal that you could plug into your calculator. So this is a great reference point of everything you need to know for transferred taxes. Now let's actually solve one. And in the question, you're going to be given certain information, such as the price of the property, and we'll say $250,000. And let's say that there is a new loan of, we'll say $150,000, and an assumed loan of, we'll say $50,000, which would have left them with a $50,000 down payment to be able to purchase this property. That's not what the question's asking, though. This is just the information given to us in the question. What the question is now asking is to calculate the transfer taxes. And as far as what the question is going to be giving you to solve a question like this is it. This and a bunch of other words about the scenario here that a property is purchased for $250,000, there's a new loan for $150,000, an assumed loan for $50,000, and there might even be some other details in there, but they're not going to tell you how much the stamps are. They're not going to tell you that they're per $100, and they're not going to tell you which one applies to which. So going back to this screen right here, this is ultimately what you need to memorize to be able to answer this question. The good news is, once you get this down, once you've drilled this enough, it can be very easy to solve these questions like we're about to do. So let's start off, and we'll keep the color coding the same. We'll do the stamp on the deed in blue. So that's going to be right here based on our purchase price. So we're going to take that purchase price, and we're going to divide that by 100. Now, with these here, all these zeros, we're not going to have to worry about rounding, but stick around because we'll do an example after this where we will have to worry about rounding, and you'll see how it does make a difference here because it goes against common rounding rules, and if you forget this step, that can be the difference of a right and wrong answer, or just your answer not matching up with any of the answer choices at all, which doesn't really get you anywhere. But back to solving the stamp on the deed. We take the price, we divide it by 100, and you can use a calculator for this on your exam, a basic 4-function calculator just like this one that you see right here. Nothing much more advanced than this. Little trick though, we're just going to basically take out these 2 zeros just like that because we're dividing here. If you have any doubt about that trick, it's worth it just to do it on your calculator rather than trying to figure out little math tricks here and there. But anyways, that should leave us now with 2,500. And you know what? We'll double check it just to be sure. It always helps to double check it. You could use your little math tricks, but just double check that. Divide it by 100, and then there it is, $2,500. So you are allowed to use a basic 4-function calculator like this on your exam. Now, 2,500, we're going to multiply this by 70 cents times 0.70, and that's going to give us $1,750 as our stamp tax on the deed. Now, if the question were only asking what is the stamp tax on the deed, that would be all we would have to do. But if it's asking for the total transfer taxes, we now have to do very similar math. Now we're going to do this in red for the note, where again, we want to do these separately. It wouldn't really make a difference here because we're just, we don't have any zeros. It's all zeros at the end, so there's not going to be any rounding that's involved here. But in case there was rounding, it would make a difference doing these separately, and we'll do that example next. So 150,000, so that's going to give us 1,500 and 500 stamps. These now are 35 cents each. So we'll do those calculations in our calculator. 1,500 times 0.35, and that's going to give us $525 here. And then we'll plug in down here 500 times 0.35 per stamp, and that's going to give us $175. So simple as that, but we're not done yet because we still need to calculate the intangible tax. So far, what we did is we calculated the deed stamp, and then these two here, we did the note stamp because you charge note stamps on both new and assumed loans. So any type of loan that's being transacted for this property, whether it's the loan being taken over or brand new loan being created, both of those will need a stamp tax on the note. But the intangible tax, key thing to remember there, is on new mortgages. So we just take that new loan of $150,000 and we multiply that by 2 mils, 0.002. This one, vastly simpler, especially with a calculator. 150,000 times 0.002. And our intangible tax is going to be another $300. You can see how much shorter the math is here. We'll carry that over here for the $300 for the intangible tax. And now we can just add these up. Our stamp on the deed, our 2 note stamps to get the total. So we've got $1,750 plus 525 plus 175 plus 300. And we get a total of transfer taxes of $2,750. As simple and easy as that, but the key thing behind this is really remembering this, which this becomes a lot easier to remember the more you do this. So rather than focusing on the formulas, I don't even like using that word formulas because it's a word most people don't like. If you like formulas, sure, call them that. But rather than just trying to memorize these, do the math. Do the math. And more importantly, you'll be able to do the math. The more times you do it, you'll remember the steps, and then you could recreate the formulas once you remember the steps of what you're doing. It's almost like the whole chicken before the egg, which came first. I would recommend doing this first. If you're lost, if you're confused, if you're trying to figure this out, start by practicing. Just like we just did here, do this on repeat. Do this again and again and again. Wherever you're watching this on, put this on repeat. Practice this again and again and again. The same exact question, and you're going to start to remember these steps. And then you can do a little bit trickier ones like we're about to do here. So, there we go. Let's get that right there. Perfect. What we're going to do next is very similar. We're going to have a price of a property. We're going to have a new loan. And we're also going to have an assumed loan. Because why not? Because your exam probably will. And let's say that the price is $299,125. $299,125. And let's say that the new loan, the newly created loan, is, let's say, $203,121. Just making these numbers up as I go. They're not friendly numbers, which is why, again, good news, you could use a calculator on your exam. And finally, our assumed loan, let's make that $57,002. So now we've got some more out of the ordinary numbers here. And what's going to happen is every single one of these, we're going to have to round for the number of stamps. So for our deed, we'll have to divide that by 100. And also for our note stamps, we'll also divide these by 100. When you can see the patterns also, because these are all stamp taxes. Now, let's also put on here so we don't forget our intangible tax. And it's going to be based on that same new loan amount of $203,121,000. And at the top here, it's our deed stamp. Down here, we've got our note stamps. So let's focus on the deed stamp up top here, because we're going to come up with the number of stamps needed. We're going to take our handy dandy calculator here of $299,125 and divide it by 100. We're basically just going to be moving 2 decimal places. That's another trick you can do with this here. But until that makes perfect sense, you just do it in your calculator. So that's going to leave us with 2,991.25. So this is the key part of this example here, is we can't get a quarter of a stamp. So what we have to do now is round up. Even though this is 0.25 and normal rounding rules would say to round down, you always round up to the next full stamp because the government doesn't want to be cheated out of their 70 cents in this case here. So this is going to be 2,992. Now let's do the same thing down here for the note stamp. With the note stamp, when we divide this by 100, again, we're basically just going to be moving 2 decimal places over for those 2 zeros. And that's going to give us 2,031. Double check this in our calculator. 2031.21 divided by 100. And that gives us 2,031 and 21. But again, we can't have 0.21 of a stamp either. So again, we're going to have to round up. Instead of 2,031, it's going to be 2,032 note stamps needed for this one. And then we're going to have to do that one more time down here, because when we take 57,002 and divide that by 100, that's going to give us 570.02. And even the 0.02 is enough to have to go to 571. So the point being here, always round up when we're talking about stamps. When we're talking about transfer taxes, the stamps associated with the deed or the notes, you always have to round up for any fraction of a stamp. And if you combine these two together, the 0.21 plus the 0.02, you'd only round up once, if that makes sense, instead of rounding up twice. So you would have the shortage of one of these stamps here, or 35 cents, which the government would not be happy about, nor would the exam, nor would you have the right answer, because you need to do these separately if you're having to round for every single one. It's imperative at that point. If you don't have to round, combining these two notes together, you can do it, but why have two different ways to do the same thing? If doing it together potentially causes an issue sometimes, don't ever do it. Always do it separate if that will never lead to an issue, which it won't. So always calculate your stamps on the note separately for each loan, just in case you do have to round for both loans. Now, finally, last step in solving these notes here is multiplying them, the notes and the deed stamps, by their cost, which for the deed is 70 cents, and for the two notes, it is 35 cents. We're multiplying those by. So we'll put that in our calculator, 2,992 times 0.7, and that's going to give us, for our stamp tax on the deed, a total price. And it's okay to have dollars and cents at the end. It's okay here because you could have coins. You could write an exact check for the coins, but for the number of stamps, that's the key part right here, where we always have to round up. So right here, $2,094.40. That's okay to have that 40 cents, or write it a little more properly there, 0.40. And we're likely going to have change for each one of these here. So let's go ahead and do 2032 times 0.35. That gives us $711.20. And then finally, for our final stamp on the note for the assumed loan, we have 571 stamps times 35 cents. And that's going to give us $199.85. But we're not done yet, because we still need to take this new loan here and multiply it by 0.002. Because the new loan is going to be taxed twice, on the note stamp as well as the intangible tax. So do not forget about that secondary tax on the newly created mortgages. So that is going to give us, when we take $203,121 for the new mortgage times 0.002, $406 and about 24 cents. We'll use normal rounding rules here. Should might have added. Yeah, perfect. And now finally, we'll combine all of these together to get our total taxes due. We'll take our $2,094.40 plus $711.20 plus $199.85 plus $406.24 to get a grand total of $3,411.69 as our total taxes due at the time of closing for the transfer taxes. Of course, there's also property taxes and all kinds of other taxes that are also involved in your real estate potentially as well. The main one being property taxes. There could be other recording fees and so on and so forth. But this, in its essence, that we've described it and shown it today, is almost exactly like how you'll see it on your exam. You maybe won't have to round for every single stamp like we did in this example here. You might not have to do any rounding at all like this previous example that we did earlier. But if you practice these two, you'll know the rule about rounding up, and you'll also know how to do it when it's simpler and there's no rounding necessary. So start here, practice this one a few times, and once you've got that down, now level yourself up to practice with the rounding. And that's the great thing about a video. You could put me on day or night, 24/7, anytime you need to practice this, and write it down as you go. Don't just watch this, actually do it, because the act of doing it will really help you get this down. And if you want to practice actually writing all kinds of stuff down, that's why we have a workbook that goes along with our exam cram videos. That's part of our Pass First Try exam prep tools. You can get the full strategy at passfirsttry.com. That link right there, it'll break it down step by step, exactly how we walk you through these exam prep materials. We have our most detailed and most interactive, which is your exam cram videos, but then we also have tools to test your knowledge, such as the question simulator, and tools to be able to automate your studying with the audio review, where you could just listen on repeat. Just like repetition is going to help you with this math, the good news is the math is really the only ones you have to really focus on doing again and again and again, because these are the most predictable questions on your exam. And there's a whole set of math questions you can practice along with right at the end of this workbook here, right at the end of the exam cram video series. So all the math that you need to practice for your exam, you could find in there, along with review of all the most important key topics from your course. If your certificate of completion is still good, it's good for 2 years, this is all you need to make the difference between the knowledge that you need to be able to pass your state exam. If you don't have a completion certificate yet, or it's been more than 2 years, you will need our pre-licensing course, which you can do live in person, video on demand. We even have a completely text-based online course if you prefer that, as well as live instructors online. So whatever method works best for your learning style. And we have success stories across all different course formats. So don't worry about whether you're doing in person or online. Do what works best for you, because ultimately, at the end of the day, what matters most is getting it done. And that's where these exam prep tools really help across the board, whether you're doing in person, online, anytime, anywhere, just because it simplifies the material so much. It goes from a 500-page textbook worth of information down to about 100 pages worth of workbook style review here. So very bullet pointed, very simplified, not necessarily your best legal reference for all aspects of the law. That's where this is going to be a little bit better for the details. But when it comes to what's tested on your exam, it's not always those extra details that matter. The real world case studies in here are great for understanding the information, but most of the time they're not testing at all on those real world case studies. There's very few actual real world events that might even show up at all. They may be more so related to the Fair Housing Act and things like that, because this is primarily a test on laws and rules. So there's a big focus on laws and rules here. We cover all the math that you need. All the different key terms are going to be mentioned throughout here, and the audio review is an even more condensed review that's really good for getting those repetitions on, especially for those key points and the vocabulary. A lot of the chapters, like the finances and the mortgages, as well as titles and deeds, those all are very key term vocabulary heavy. So the better you could speak the language of real estate, the better you'll be able to perform on this exam. The better you're able to replicate doing these math questions right here, the better you're going to do on this exam. These math questions can be 10 easy points that you could knock out just by knowing how to do the math, because there's not much variation you're going to see on the exam. Now, the non-math questions, it's hard to study for those exact questions because there's so many of them and they could ask about them in so many different contexts. It's likely some sort of scenario, and we walk through a lot of these potential scenarios in the exam cram videos for any of them where there could be a potential scenario, but there's so many of them that they could just ask about the law in several different ways, or hide some misdoing of the law in this little story to see if you can spot it. So we talk about all kinds of exam strategies. We even have a dedicated course for that called The Secrets of the Exam. So if you have any questions about that, or maybe you just want to see the guide first and find out what this is all about, just head over to PassFirstTry.com. PassFirstTry.com, because we want to help you pass that exam on your first try. It does help you maintain momentum. It does help you boost your confidence, even if what they're testing you on is primarily laws and rules that are not the most important when it comes to your success in real estate. They're really just important when it comes to keeping your real estate license, which is really very important to your success in real estate. But legal compliance doesn't necessarily make you wealthy. It just keeps you from losing your real estate license. Once you get your license, there's a course called post-licensing that's going to be much more valuable when it comes to actually planning your real estate business. But for now, if you're still needing to take the course or pass your exam, the laws and rules are going to be the focus. And so if you need any guidance, anytime, 24/7, call into us, 813-333-2676. Again, that's 813-333-2676. Call us up 24/7 or visit us online at PassFirstTry.com. We want to get you passing your exam, if not on the first try, on the next try. If you want a confidential consultation with one of our advisors over what you should be doing exactly to study, maybe where you've gone wrong and you're studying before, maybe you've already taken the exam and you've got an exam report you'd like us to take a look at and give you a personalized strategy guide for going through and overcoming any obstacles you're encountering on the exam, reach out to us. We even have private tutoring services available if you're in need of that. If you really want some one-on-one individualized attention, call us up, 813-333-2676. That's about all the time that we've got for today. Thank you all for tuning in. We'll be back this Friday for State of Real Estate. Until then, have a fantastic rest of your week.
The most powerful tool to study for your real estate exam is the Question Simulator from Tampa School of Real Estate. We've used our years of experience in preparing students for the Florida real estate exam to bring you the most powerful exam study tool available. In the Question Simulator, you'll be able to go directly to a particular unit so you can focus on the sections where you need the most practice. We have also included the percentages of each unit so you know which units are the most important for your real estate exam. Every question will immediately give you detailed feedback, which is almost always more important than the question or the answer themselves. After completing all the questions in a particular unit, you can go through question by question and review any that you've gotten wrong. You could also print out a report at the end of each quiz. The Question Simulator from Tampa School of Real Estate is 100% mobile compatible, so you can practice with test questions anywhere you have your phone with you. Enroll now at QuestionSimulator.com and get ready to pass your exam.
Are you studying for your Florida real estate exam? If you are, you need to check out our Pass First Try strategy. You're going to love this. It's 4 steps that we break down the process to study for your Florida real estate exam. So you're set up to pass your Florida real estate exam because that's what you're studying for, right? To pass your exam. It's 4 steps. Number 1, you learn the information. You've got to learn this to be able to pass the exam, but it doesn't stop at learning. Step 2, you've got to reinforce the basic, simple, key concepts. As you learn this information, keep reviewing the simple things. You don't need to know everything, but you got to review these basic key concepts. Step 3, you've got to test your knowledge. The exam's going to test your knowledge, so if you don't test your knowledge in advance, you won't find out if you know what you think you know until you take the exam. And then step 4 is be confident and prepared, because even if you know this material, you need to be confident that you know the material. Check out the full strategy at PassFirstTry.com. That's PassFirstTry.com.